All right. So, welcome to this webinar hosted by Flowla at the back of our research that we've done a couple of weeks ago. And we shared the webinar is called Mind the Gap, Bridging the Gap Between Buyer Expectations and What Sellers Do. I'm joined by three amazing panelists today on this webinar. Lisa I'm not seeing my slides yet, so it would be nice to have those so I don't mess up anybody's titles or the names of their companies, hopefully. Otherwise, I'm just going to go freestyle and they'll feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But Lisa Travnik, based in the US, she is the Chief Growth Officer for SourceMap. Hannah Ajikawo, if I'm butchering your surname, Hannah, I'm so sorry. It's just how I say it. Perfect, great. Unless you're living under a stone or in a cave, you know Hannah probably. She's one of our LinkedIn top voices that we featured in our almanac end of last year. She's the CEO and founder of Revenue Tunnel and the top LinkedIn voice. And Christina Brady, amazing Christina Brady, is the CEO and co-founder, still a new, I would say, co-founder like myself of Luster AI. And she's a great voice, very fun and interesting and smart that I love to follow on LinkedIn on all things revenue and leadership. Welcome to the panel, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. This is going to be a fun convo.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Thank you very much for anyone joining. I think it's about time we kick off. So first of all, I have to mention that this is the first time I'm hosting a webinar at Flowla. So if I make any mistakes, apologies, and feel free to interrupt. Anyone listening to us, please drop your questions on the chat box all day, every day. Engage. The last time we did this was my co-founder Erdem, and we had great engagement and great conversation going on in the chat box. So we'll make sure to spare 5 or 10 minutes at the end for questions. Maybe if we can move to the next slide. So this conversation will be guided by our research, which we've done recently with 200 top executives who are in buying positions. We try to understand if buyers are happy with the way they're being sold and if there's something that needs to change. And today with my wonderful panelists, we'll be discussing maybe some horror stories that they know from their lives, the highs and lows, and how to improve things, right? This is the brief agenda of today. I'm going to start with our section, which is going to be understanding the frustration of the buyers that we've listened to. So if we can skip to the next slide, Ellen. And I promise I'll shut up.
Did we lose him?
I think, no, the internet's made Alper shut up.
Guided by 5 questions. Okay. The very first question that we ask people is, the very first question we asked our buyers is, have you had a negative buying experience in the last 3 months? And as you can see on the left, the number, 65% of people who responded were like, yes, I had a really terrible experience in the last 3 months. That's quite a striking number. I'm going to let everyone read some of the quotes for a second. And actually, I'm going to ask people to share some of their horror stories of being sold to in the last whatever. And with that in mind, maybe I'm going to yield the floor to the ladies, and let's start with Hannah. Like all day, every day, you're listening to buyers, you're talking to sellers. Do these resonate?
Yeah, it's very accurate, and it's so interesting. Sometimes people think they see a relatively small sample, and you're like, oh, maybe it's not representative. This is very representative of what I hear when I'm listening to calls and reviewing them, but also as a buyer myself, right? I've spent quite a lot of money as a small business owner in the last year in just really trying to improve my own business and optimize it. And I've experienced where I've explicitly stated that there's some limitations in what I can do based on the solution that was on offer. And they were like, no problem. Like we can accommodate that and we can do all these things. And I thought, you know what? That it feels genuine. And then you get to it. It's like, oh, hey, you know that one thing that I said was critical? And it's like, oh, yeah, no, we can't do that. And I think that it just leaves such a bad taste in your mouth as a buyer, particularly when it's different. Like for me, I'm like, I report to myself, but can you imagine that I delegated that responsibility to someone and then I stepped in as the user or the person being impacted? And I'd be going straight to that buyer, like, what did you do? How could you buy this? How could you spend that money knowing that we're not going to get these things? So I feel like in our, as salespeople, we really have to be conscious of some of the expectations we're setting, specifically when people are saying stuff and we're just not listening. It's just so important, particularly today.
One thing I really find really fascinating is, as sellers, we only get to buying positions so late in our careers that we don't get the chance to develop that empathy, right? Like being in the buyer's shoes and having some of those terrible experiences where you're like, please stop selling me in this way. Like, do you have some of those moments, Christina? And obviously, because of your product and what you're doing, you're trying to improve on all those fronts. Like, what would you add to that?
I would say that sellers are accidentally right now coming across as selfish, right? They're approaching every conversation with what they need to get out of that, right? And it's led by trying to make sure that everyone in your organization is following your sales process and your sales methodology, and knowing I'm going into this call and I have to get these boxes checked. And so in order for me to get my boxes checked, I'm leading the conversation and making the buyer give me what I need to go into my CRM and make sure that I can advance this to the next stage, right? So it's very, and I say accidentally because I don't think that this is how salespeople and companies are meaning to come across, but it is so self-serving. And instead of doing a lot of listening to what buyers want and need and how they want to buy, the process is so driven by the company. And then it's relying on things like rapport building that are actually just small talk wearing a bad disguise. And so we're missing the mark in so many different ways. And of course, buyers are having a bad experience because it's uncomfortable, it's awkward, they're not getting what they need. And so they sit back and they disengage, and they're going to start engaging with salespeople or companies that don't do that. And I actually think that's why we saw such an increase in like PLG type of motions, is simply because customers wanted to go and buy the way that they wanted to buy. And unfortunately, they started to think the way to do that is to not include a salesperson. Whereas if you see a salesperson on their game with a buyer-centric mentality, they're almost unstoppable. And so why we're not paying more attention to that versus celebrating the idea of this self-serving sales process, to me, that's where the problem really lies.
I love all of that. And I have so much to say, but Lisa, would you like to contribute with maybe some of the horror stories that you hear or you try to improve on?
Yeah, so from a career standpoint, my experience actually started as a buyer in marketing, and then product marketing, and then RevOps, and then I came to more of the growth and sales position. And so I think that did benefit me in a lot of ways when it comes to empathy, right? Especially when I think RevOps products are the toughest here, but there are so many marketing tools. There's so much overlap. I think Hannah's point around, what's really important to me and the right fit for me, like the opacity of that is just, I saw it so many times, and I was the burned buyer or user a number of times. So I absolutely appreciate that. And just to add on to what Christina said too, I think another way that this manifests is, so I've joined a lot of privately backed organizations kind of at a growth stage. And so you inherit a lot of different layers. The playbook, right? The privately backed company playbook, and kind of having that either push on you or needing to kind of play that game with the board. And then you have a team of folks who are really good at the playbook, perhaps a bunch of sellers that are great at the playbook. And then you have the sellers who really want to get in there and build like a user and buyer centric playbook specifically for your organization. And so all that to say, yes, I've seen it. It can be really hard from a leadership standpoint to I don't want to say bridge the gap, plug the title here, but to really evolve an organization and sort of understand where you need to replace people or replace culture. But in any case, I couldn't agree more. I can say I've never felt like I've won in my role in a year or two down the line in a growth position, continuing to drumbeat a playbook only and not really turning things around somehow, right? Turning that camera around. So I've never seen the results out of that, candidly. And I think there may have been a time and place when that worked. I just haven't seen it in my career.
Yeah. The playbook is all good, especially for scaling, but what people want from you is a human interaction, which actually brings me to the next stage. By the way, before I move to the next slide and the next question, I'm going to say the thing I hate most as a buyer is when being followed up and chased in the wrong times. And then when I'm chasing people to get some answers, I'm not getting them. And the second one is an FBI investigation like Medpic Discovery. That is the worst thing. Like, I'm sitting through a call where, you know, I have to answer 10 questions and it's not going anywhere. If we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, which is about how the buyers actually see the role of the seller. Like, the seller's role is to help the buyer to make a good enough decision. And I'm just going to share some of our findings from this before I start the conversation on this. But when asked the question, how do you see the main job of a seller? A lot of people will say it's sharing information, it's helping me to understand, it's hand-holding me if I'm the champion, helping me to build a case, right? And I think that's a lot of what our users of a digital sales room are selling, and why they're using us as well. But contrary to that, face the situation, which is where you're the seller. Your role is being the helper, but only at the terms that your buyers are allowing you to help them. Which is, when asked the question, how do you want to receive the information? A lot of people will say, I want to do my own research. I want it to be async. I don't want to be in meetings. I don't want to be in calls. Hence this gap. Like, okay, you as the buyer want all the information on me to help, but you don't have any time for me. You don't allow me to help you. So do you face this dilemma in your day-to-day? Like, maybe starting with any of you who wants to go first, and let's dive into this a little.
There's so much to unpack here, right? And even if you think over the last, what has it been, about 5 years that Gartner's been putting out research around sense making, and where, like, that one of the challenges is just the sense of having so much information that you're like, okay, and the reps that come in to differentiate are the ones who can just help you make sense of it and cut through the noise. But in order for you to do that, I need to trust, you know, Christina, the salesperson, to come to me and be like, I'm just going to listen to Christina. She's built enough trust with me that I'm going to listen to what she says. If she says, don't read that report, I'm just not going to read it. And it's very hard to establish that because we don't get trained or enabled to do that. And I completely, again, I believe this is true, right? So it's like, as a sales, you know, they're thinking the salesperson is to share, you know, help me understand my problem. And it's like, yeah, but I don't actually want to talk to you, because my belief is that I would love you to help me. But firstly, I don't know when I need help, because I need to figure some stuff out on my own. And also, when I finally interact with you, you're really annoying. Actually, you're not helping me. You're adding more confusion. So now I've got more stuff. I'm like, I'm back at stage one. And to make it worse, you labeled our call a discovery call, and buyers don't do discovery calls. So that's like my pet peeve when I see
it. Feels like you're holding yourself there.
I hate seeing meetings in reps' calendars that says discovery call. Yeah, I'm like, what is that? I'm like, that's
yeah, definitely a better name. Maybe drop in the chat what should be a better way to call those. Christina, don't hold yourself anymore. Please share with us.
I'm just celebrating everything that she's saying, because the other thing to keep in mind is that at this point in time, salespeople probably occupy less than 10% of the total buying process. And that is for every solution that they are shopping for to solve that problem. So you have this tiny, tiny fraction of time and thus influence over the buying process, because now buyers are looking at anywhere from 9 to 15 resources to determine if they want to buy your product, and your voice is a small piece of that. The other thing is that we've trained buyers out of trusting the resources that we send, because the resources, again, that we send are so self-serving. I believe that you are going to send me every amazing case study of every great job that you've ever done. I don't think as a salesperson, you're going to send me an example of a time you absolutely dropped the ball, right? If you are a brain surgeon that has killed 90% of your patients, I don't think when you're advertising, you're going to tell me all the people whose brain you bought. You're going to tell me the 10% that are still walking around and functional. And so buyers don't trust the information that you are sending them. And so it doesn't mean don't send information, don't send case studies, but understand they're not going to take what you send at face value. They are going to do their own research. And if you are not understanding the story that exists about you and your organization outside of your sphere of influence, you're going to lose every time. And that could be what is on the web, what is on LinkedIn, what is on Glassdoor, what is on G2, what do your customers or previous prospects say about you? So the research that they're doing to prove if that case study is a 1 one-off, if it's a standard deviation or the norm, is going to happen. So as much as you're controlling what you're sending to them, you also need to control the overall narrative and make sure you're doing your part in conjunction with the rest of your go-to-market team to make sure that you're being talked about properly when you're not in the room, because it's going to happen.
Lisa, how do you control that being talked about, and how do you control the information sharing? Like at SourceMap, you sometimes have to explain yourself, educate the client, share a lot of, like, I guess all of this would resonate with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So without getting too in the weeds, SourceMap is it's a bit of a category creator, right? We're a supply chain software organization. It's regulatory software, and we're helping comply with laws that, in a lot of cases, aren't completed yet, aren't written yet. They're coming into enforcement in 2025, 2026. And so there is a bit of education, actually a burden of education in some cases. And so we do a lot of educating in our sales process. What we try to do is, to Christina's point, not shove case studies, not shove kind of promotional materials. We have a set of materials, and of course we use Flowla for this primarily, that tries to be quite factual and kind of just outline the offering, and what would be important, just something that can be accessible pretty quickly. As soon as we do kind of a quick introduction with someone, a case for a discovery call, I think in some cases, Hannah, because we do have clients coming in just saying, can you explain a little bit more? And then we give them educational material. And then from there, we actually do very few case studies. We just find, we actually promote and sort of pull up pertinent areas where we are being discussed on the web, kind of good or bad. We show up in annual reports of some of our clients, for instance. So if it's a vertical of that client, we'll just say, hey, we're not going to add more kind of case studies that are branded to your queue here, but let me just plug something that a client published outside, that you could Google yourself, right? And so try to do kind of a healthy mix of that. We let people do that async. We let them converse with us, ask questions, and then from there we have kind of curated content that would explain the nuance of whatever they're asking based on their persona and whatnot, and kind of their particular needs. Because again, we don't find that that's super successful. We can see no one engages with that. That's not groundbreaking. That's not surprising. So candidly, we just don't really bother. And we just try to build kind of pieces of content that can be digested for FAQs. So,
and just in terms of some maybe practical tips for our audience, like this third point about helping build consensus internally, like empowering the champion to do the selling for you, etc. Like, do you have any tips, any practical things that maybe like out of ordinary things that you do, like any of you want to maybe share, like this is something that you should do to empower your champion that is really impactful, if anyone would like to contribute to that?
Yeah, it's interesting that people don't see a seller's job as helping them to build consensus internally, because it varies, right? So I always say there's two different sides of where people are when it comes to making buying decisions. It's really, really early on where they don't have a consensus, or it's late, and that's where most of our energy goes. Everyone I speak to, the sales training clients I have, they're like, Hannah, we're not too bad at the opportunities where people are looking for stuff. It's the people that aren't. And it's really hard to get that kind of education, that consensus. And I'm like, I know, but it's because we gear our entire business towards only working with, only optimizing our systems, our processes, our methodologies to people that are in market, when we should be looking at people who are experiencing latent issues, right? So the thing is to really, and this is where we have to, from a kind of practical perspective, is we need to be doing the old school kind of like, let me look at my territory, let me look at our sweet spot, and getting in really early. Because what you want to do is you want to shape and say, hey, Christina, I know that, things that you may not recognize are actually creeping up, that's coming over the horizon. So something that Lisa's company has a kind of like an unfair advantage of, because they're like, you may not know, but 2026, you kind of have to talk to us, right? But you want to almost position yourself in as that expert to say, I just want to help educate you on something that's coming in 2026 that you may not have thought about. Because as you do that, you start to put something on the agenda that they didn't even used to, they may not have been thinking about. So like, try to get items on the agenda that are going to be necessary for you selfishly, but of course are going to impact positively the buyer at a later stage. Because if you wait until they are at that stage where they're in market, the 5 vendors are in, the 5 decision makers are in, the other, like the 10% bracket, you want to make that 90%. You want to take up 90% of that buying experience.
I love that. Then you're the trusted advisor. Then you're the trusted advisor who's sharing the information that's not available to them. I love that. Maybe Christina, very quick contribution to that, and then I'll move on to the next slide.
I support all of that. And the thing that I'll say here too is this pie chart is very, very interesting to me, because they sort of all lead to one, right? Like these should not be viewed as three separate things that sellers are doing. Like your job as a seller is to share the right and relevant information that pertains to the problem and the value of how you can solve that problem, which is going to lead to a fundamental understanding of the problem the organization has. And by giving them a combination of those two things, they can build consensus internally because they now have a story to sell that they can tell without you in the room. So if you're thinking of your job as being segmented, like, do I share info or do I help them build consensus? Like you share info that helps them understand the problem so they can build an internal consensus, right? Like it all leads into one.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually this next section starts talking about that a little bit in detail. If we can move to the next slide, Ellen, let's talk about that overall journey where you're sharing the information and giving what we call the buyer experience. As you've all mentioned, like people have a lot of tools, information, they do their own research, they go and compare. But when it comes to the relationship between the seller and the buyer, and what are top priorities for a buyer to buy to choose a vendor or a seller, obviously product features come first in our research. Around 59% say I look at the product features. Obviously no surprise there. But what's really interesting is that they cite buyer experience as the second most important criteria. That relationship, that hand-holding, that walking together, being in the same journey, it's even more than the cost. So I guess this means when people are presented the right kind of product with the right experience, they're happy to pay for it. Or maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
I mean, I can say that recently I was in a sales process for, I would argue, a commodity tool, data for BDRs, for lead gen, right? There's a number of products out there and it's constantly evolving. I knew what I wanted. I wanted to check a couple feature boxes. I was ready to buy. And I was inches away from walking away because the buying experience was so poor. And I ended up actually knowing someone there and reaching out and just saying, hey, like, do you want to save this or should I move on? And they're kind of able to bring it around. But I couldn't agree with this more because it's a proxy to me to what experience I'm going to have with the product later on. I assume it's a reflection of the culture. I don't think sales and CX will be completely different. So absolutely, to me, it's a huge warning sign.
Love that. Thanks for sharing that. And I think in our research, if anybody is interested, there's so many of those situations where we heard quotes saying like, it was the right product, etc. But the whole process was so annoying that I dropped and I went for somebody else. Hannah, Christina, anything you want to share on that part?
Yeah, I mean, it gets really bad with the buyer experience. I mean, and I think what saddens me is oftentimes it's because of the way we have enabled reps to act in certain ways. So like gatekeeping information and, oh, you can't do this unless you've hit these, like, BDR, you get someone like Lisa that's like, hey, I've used this product 3 times in previous roles. I really want to buy it. Just want to check these 2 pieces. And the BDR is like, I can't give you cost. It's like, I just need to know what it, and it's like, I can't give you cost. You need to meet the AE. It's like, that's fine. Send me to the AE. Yeah, but I need to get, it got so bad with a prospect that the prospect knew me and they knew that I was working to do some like go-to-market work with this client. And they just said, Hannah, like, what is going on? I can't get past the BDR team. I was like, what? So they actually called my CEO to say, can you just get me like in? And I went above like the whole team to the leader. I was like, your team are not letting this prospect through and they know the solution. And it's because they're like, they're not freed to do anything. It's just like, I have to follow this process. And it's actually quite scary. But that experience is the whole reason why it becomes so important. Exactly what Lisa said, like it sets the expectations of what's to come. But it's also, I always say, like, remember, a whole deal and buyer experience is about de-risking a sale. And if you are going through a process where it's just friction, difficult, it's not clear, the communication's off, you're like, I just feel like there's so much risk here. There's so much unknowns, even though I'm against a deadline when I need to get this in place. So that's why it becomes, over and above the experience. I do the same thing with restaurants. I walk into a restaurant, and if I'm waiting 5 minutes for someone to say, can you have a table? I'm out. I'll just go somewhere that charges more, where I know that they're not going to ever let someone walk out if they're going to get like $100, $200 from me. So that's what I do, the same thing.
I love that point so much, The thing that I will add is if you have a cruddy buyer experience or you have reps that understand how to properly build rapport and value sell, then the only thing that companies are going to shop you against is your price. Like you suddenly make your price the number one factor in lieu of proper features, communication, experience, acumen, and good old fashioned customer service, right? So at the end of the day, like that example of the restaurant of walking in and like nobody is greeting me. If they come over and they try to sell me a $25 burger, I'm going to say, go kick rocks, right? Whereas if I go into a restaurant and they're like, yeah, the service is kind of cruddy, but the burgers are just $1, you're like, okay, right? So it's like, it suddenly becomes about now the price matters because everything else doesn't. So if you want your customers to be shopping you based on price, go ahead and offer them a cruddy experience. And I hope you're the cheapest because that's the only way that you might win a couple of them.
Yeah.
So true.
Lisa, anything you want to add to that? I really love the point that you raised there, and I don't think we have it on the slide here, but friction. It's a word we love at Flowla because everything that we do as a digital sales room, the point is to create like an end-to-end experience from the first contact to onboarding, because the buyer doesn't care about your, now you're going to talk to the BDR, now you're going to talk to the AE. If they could, they would talk to nobody, but then at least one person, right? But every friction that you're introducing to your process is actually hindering the chances of closing that deal. So I'm wondering, like, Lisa, in your day-to-day, like, how do you remove those frictions, or do you feel like they exist no matter what?
Well, I can't say that I've built the formula for never having friction for anyone ever in my funnel. I mean, I'm not here to say that, but I will say that one kind of key thing in the playbook, if you will, again, is a touch point doesn't have to be a call, right? I think there's just like this, you have to get in front of them, you have to get them on the phone. I just don't think that's true. I mean, it used to be that it seemed unprofessional to text a prospect. I think some prospects, if they're your champion, they'd love a quick text to check in, how'd the call go? How'd the internal call go? I talk a lot to my reps about customer enablement, right? So it's about giving them what they need to feel good about the decision they're making and to feel good enough about that to go out on a limb for you in their own organization. And so for every client, that's a little bit different, but I don't hold my reps accountable to calls necessarily. It's important to build a rapport. There's a little bit of qualification, right? You want to make sure before you give a prospect something that they have some base level understanding, especially if you are in a category creation. But then beyond that, especially if they're educated, they've known you for a while, kind of understanding that, give them what they need and let them come back. I mean, be there, be available. But I don't believe in this, let's book another hour to get pricing. Let's book another hour. I mean, you want to be able to get in front of them enough and then let it rip, and it can ebb and flow. I just think that if you make it too hard, people will just fade off, especially, if they're senior buyers. So we have different kind of paths depending on where they are.
Yeah. And I think, like, again, the job of the seller is to help the buyer to make that good enough decision, which is you don't have to share everything like 100%. It's kind of an 80-20. You have to make sense of the data that you have and help them in the best way possible. And a lot of times it's not about sharing what is already out there, but you mentioned this point about like the regulation that's upcoming. Maybe the mismatch is in what you know as as the seller, and you have a competitive advantage over that, and you're sharing that in advance and anticipating. So I'm just curious in this regard, like, how do you train a rep to give a stellar buyer experience? Like, Christina, I don't know, is that kind of your bread and butter, or?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that buyer experience fails is that most of the time when we are learning how to be masters of our craft, the number one place that we are practicing our talk tracks and our value selling is on live fire calls with customers. So rarely, especially if your company is changing a lot or rolling out new products or hiring new people, your customers are not getting a stellar experience because we're using them as guinea pigs to improve our craft. And then by the time you nail it, things change again and everybody goes back into that learning curve. And so, like, yes, my company is utilizing AI, generative AI, to be able to practice those conversations in a real scenario without the buyer. What I would say is there's a lot of tools and ways to do that. The element here is practice your conversations before you have them. Practice going into a conversation with an end in mind. Practice the flow of your conversation. Get used to getting caught off track, because you are going to go into a conversation and your buyer is going to throw you off. And if you don't follow them while at the same time guiding them where you have to go, like you're going to take a deviation. And if you're following a script or a checkbox and you're not comfortable in ambiguity, then you're not practiced enough. Every master of their craft of anything achieves mastery and maintains it because you can't out practice them. And by the time they're performing on a sales call, they're comfortable. They know what to do. They can pivot, they can bend, they can flex, they know what to anticipate, and they can listen to the communication style of the person that they are talking to and amend that. They can mirror them. They can become a valuable person because they know enough about their craft that they can put that down and simply listen and be present in the conversation. And so often we don't do that. Buyer experiences are bad because people are inherently uncomfortable talking to their prospects. They're terrified. And I get it. I've been there.
Yeah, I see it. And this, firstly, clients don't like me because I always make them do things that they don't want to do, right? So that's the first. I just put it out there, but specifically around this kind of rep enablement stuff. So I just break all the rules. So I'm not sure if people are familiar with HubSpot, what HubSpot were doing like 10, 15 years ago. But when you started as a rep, one of the first things they did is they made you, because we're selling to marketers, right? They made you like build a website, set up an online business, all those things. And I do the same thing with clients, right? Outside of the first week of like onboarding and an assessment being around just making sure you can wing together the value proposition, the first assessment is always going to be around you pitching our company as an internal buyer inside that organization, right? So I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to do my value proposition and present, this is what Flowla does. It's more like, oh, Lisa is a buyer. How would Lisa talk about Flowla to her internal teams if she had to pitch us? How would she position the needs of that company? How would she position the issues? How would she position the competitors that she looked at? And then why she would say Flowla is the best solution? Because that's really hard to do. And if you can do that really quickly inside a month, then when you get on the phone with a prospect, you can be like, you will never guess what, actually. I actually had to pretend to be you through the first month of my thing. And I know it's really hard. It's actually really hard to see the difference between some of these solutions. So let me just like point to something that's really specific that you may have overlooked, because that's what they want to focus on. That, 2 slides before, what's the one thing I don't know? Like the thing that is in between the bits that are not very clear, because otherwise it's like, okay, so you just regurgitated your website and also the slide deck that you sent me. And now I've spent an hour with you. And now you're telling me I've got to do that again with your AE, who is going to do the same thing because they don't trust the SDR's discovery or internal. Like, it's just, come on, man. So I always say, like, when it comes to rep enablement, go buyer-centric. It's not easy, but when it's done, it makes a massive difference to how they can have those conversations.
It makes it fun and human for the seller as well. I think that's why we're all in this game, for that human interaction. I mean, I love that chat. Maybe I'm going to move on to the next section a little bit just because of the time. If we can talk about, we're now talking about the human element and how that human interaction actually fosters the buying. And I think one thing that is now being talked a lot about is how do you measure buyer engagement to gauge interest and intent of the buyer, right? And unfortunately, we can't always be on a call with people because they don't want to be on a call with us all the time, at least until we build that trust. So I'm just curious, like, in your own ways throughout the sales process, what are some of the ways that you track buyer engagement? How do you define, maybe let's start with, how do you define engagement? Is it qualitative, quantitative? Is it on a call? Is it by looking at some tool? And how do you make sure that engagement happens throughout the process? Maybe let's start with you, Lisa.
Yeah. So I think something that Christina said in the last question a number of times is conversation. She said conversation. Yeah. She didn't say presentation. She didn't say slide deck, right? So to me, the sign of overall engagement is, can I see signs of a conversation? That doesn't need to be in a call, of course, with Gong. We use Gong and Flowla where I am. So you can see, is it a conversation or was it a speech? And you can see that through email, through texting, right? So that's one thing, right? Another thing that we do, and again, I'm talking about kind of a regulatory enterprise sale, but we have things that I call customer considerations, and we actually show these to clients pretty early in the process or through the process, pieces of it, to sort of say, here's something you should think about. And it would be, they'd have to think about this to know that we're the right choice. They'd have to think about this to compare us to competitors. And we sort of tease out questions to those answers throughout the process. If they're not able to answer that question, they either haven't talked to their internal stakeholders or they're really not there yet. And that's okay, that can be true. But to me, that along with kind of course, pace, velocity, engagements, all of that, how many stakeholders you have, what their title is, yes, those are inputs. But to me, it's the quality of what we're talking about. Are we getting into what you're going to integrate with? Are we getting into specifically what you're trying to solve for? And I'm not talking, just advanced type of qualification, right? But really specific to our tool in our industry. So to me, it's demonstration of a conversation that can take a lot of forms, and then the depth of that, and have they really picked up the thread, gone back to the to their own notes, and then come back to us with something. That's what's important to me in the process.
Yeah, I agree. I would also add, do you have places where your customers can collaborate with you, to your point? Don't include being on the phone. Like even
Sure.
when I'm working with a customer or when I'm working with a potential vendor and I really want to buy the solution, when the only option that I have to interact with you is giving you my time on the phone, sitting there dedicated,
Too hard.
it becomes pain. It's hard, right? And it's like, so it goes back to, how do your buyers want to buy? So do you have a tool like a Flowla? Do you have a tool like a deal room where we can collaborate? Do you have a way where you can actually measure engagement, right? Like if it's not measured, it's not happening, and revisit what those measurements of engagement look like. Can you look at interaction in documents? Can you look at reply times on emails? Can you look at the number of people that you are multi-threaded to within that organization? And do they have the same materials that everybody else has? How soon are people responding to you? Are they accepting your invitations for the meetings that you do actually have? Are they showing up? Are they engaged? Are they asking questions? What does their body language look like? There's so many quantitative and qualitative ways to do it, but high level, if you don't have a place or a way for you with that customer to engage in a comfortable setting that does not only include calendar time, then I would go so far as to say you actually can't measure buyer engagement. And if you can't measure it, it's not happening.
No, that's totally fair. I guess I assume everyone's a Flowla user, so I apologize. Yeah, I mean, we do the customer considerations as kind of a worksheet, right? And so if there's chatter, if they're coming back to us with points, if they're clarifying points, right, you have to see that. And if not, I just assume they're not using it. If no one's logged in, then they're curious. They want some information. We've got to be there, but I'm not going to assume that they're hyper engaged.
And sometimes those signals come before even you're in the deal process. I guess first you have your signals to qualify if the prospect is going to be going into your funnel. And then after that, you will have maybe indicators that you're checking, but maybe a little bit too late in the process. I don't know if that ever happens to you, this leading versus lagging indicators things. Is that ever a part of your reality where you're trying to improve things, Christina?
Oh man. So often we don't realize something is wrong until that deal keeps not coming back or it gets pushed back. And then we go back and we're like, what did we do? It's like the number of postmortems as a salesperson and sales leader that I've been in after a quarter where we've absolutely bombed and then gone back and been like, oh my gosh, most of the time we're making a misstep at the very beginning of a sales process. And that is a snowball at the top of a mountain that is pending an avalanche. And every mistake that you make, you're pushing what starts as a tiny little snowball down the hill, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it wallops you at the very end when the deal doesn't come back. And then you have to go back and try to subjectively piecemeal together where mistakes were made because you didn't have the factors in place to measure it. And unfortunately, because companies are often moving so quickly, even when we uncover issues, the process to solve them and close them is so difficult because of all of the different stakeholders that you have to pull in. Is it a tool? Is it a person? Is it a budget? Who's in charge? Who's leading this? Meanwhile, we're continuing to sell and send these snowballs down a hill. And so it doesn't get prioritized because at the end of the day, we throw our hands up and say, let's just focus on revenue and let's focus on low-hanging fruit and let's make decisions to get that done. And we don't stop and sharpen the saw. So many sales teams are running a marathon with a pebble in their shoe because they're like, well, I can keep moving even if my foot's bleeding, stopping, taking off my shoe, dumping the pebble out, and then putting my shoe back on feels somehow more painful than running the entire race with a rock in it. And so there's a paradigm shift there that has to happen.
I find it so funny. Like, I think there's just the buying, the way people buy is, and all these things have just changed so much, right? We know that over the last decade or so, but it's so funny. Even just doing a training session recently, and regarding this question, it was like, let's do a deal diagnosis and do all of that stuff. And it was like, I just want, I said, what's your, goal for this session? So I just want to really find out where's the weaknesses in this deal. Is it going to close? And all these things. And I was just like, okay, so first question, has the buyer said that they're going to buy something? I don't know, actually. I don't like the fundamentals of, hey, really at the first call, when we go for this research, when you're talking to me, if you're talking to other vendors, I don't know that yet. Is this going to end in you changing something? Are you actually going to buy something, or are you just figuring out a business case? If you're just doing a business case, I'm happy to help that. Or you can decide as a business, we have too much low-hanging fruit in our funnel where we can just get more bottom of the funnel opportunities. We don't need to spend time educating people. We're like, that's maybe for next year. Let's just go after the market that's ripe. But if you are like, we're trying to expand, then yeah, you got to start doing those business case meetings. But the most fundamental thing of like, are you actually trying to buy something, or are you trying to learn? And it's like, we actually just want to learn. Oh, damn, I need to take out my pipeline. I didn't realize that. So it's just sometimes, yes, all of the tools that we have, and I love the fact that we can track engagement, because back in the day, I had just to keep calling, just checking in. I was saying that. Don't say it now, but 15 years ago it worked, right? So it's just like, just checking in. How's it going? How's the kids? Are you gonna buy? Are you gonna buy? Right? But now it's like we can track that. So that overall engagement, two-way interactions, everything that the team was saying, multi-threading, how many people are involved in it? Has there been explicit statement of change? Is there explicit consensus that's being shared? Do we have all those key like deal qualification stuff? Because there's a lot that goes into it, but it's nice that we can digitally see it as like a leader. You can look down and be like, for my magic room, I can see that there's some good opportunities in the pipeline.
Yeah, and we're looking at that. We're building and getting constant feedback on what else needs to go into a dashboard of a Flowla analytics, and like how many people are in, what are they engaging with. And so many times we hear, I thought this person was the champion, but the other person was actually out of nowhere. They were looking at it 25 times. So I reckon that, it's something for multi-threading. But rather than promoting Flowla, something that is really interesting for me that you said is asking that first question. It takes like, are you going to actually buy something or not? That takes a lot of courage. That takes a lot of confidence. And sometimes it comes with experience, which means a lot of lost opportunities. So how can you maybe bring it forward? That ability to ask that question earlier on in the conversations. How do you train yourself on that?
I say, River, it does come with experience, right? But now from a place of experience, particularly us on the panel, you just reverse it. You basically just get them, you put it on yourself. Like, look, I do not want to get excited here. When I see your business and I see that you're going through this and you see that you're going through that, and it's really easy to assume that you are ready to get something and make change. But I want to, work to your timelines or your expectations. Where are you at? Like, are you trying to get some research? More than happy to provide resources for you. Or do you really need to understand who's going to be the most credible partner to take you on this change journey? And they will be happy to be like when people respond and they say, I'm not your hot prospect. And it's like, oh, go away. But you want them to know that I can consider you a hot prospect based on your profile, but I don't want to get it wrong. And if it is the case where you're really early on, let me meet you where you're at. And I don't have to set up all the fireworks in the business. And I think they will appreciate, with a little giggle, thank you so much, because I don't want that pressure and I'm not ready to buy yet. But so we just have to reverse it to pull it on them. Like, I can make an assumption here, because when I see that you've hired 100 reps, for us, that's like ring the bell. But you will be ready there, right? And it's okay for them to. And what you learn from that is, feeding it back up the chain to the business. You know what? I've spoken to 10 companies that have had lots of hiring and they're not really ready to buy. Can we start developing resources for education? So we want to feed that back up the chain, but reverse engineer that conversation. And I've never had a time when someone's like, I don't want to tell you that. They're like, thank you.
Yeah, if you ask the right way. Christina?
Yeah, I agree. At the end of the day, it comes down to the psychology of how human beings make decisions. And it's okay to lean into that. Every human being makes decisions based on the same 4 psychological ideas. And it's whether you're deciding what you want to eat for lunch, or what tools you want to buy, or what car you want to buy. It's, do I have a problem? Do I want to solve it? Do I want to solve it now? And only then do I want to solve it with you. And what so many salespeople do is someone says, I have a problem. And they go, you have a problem? Do I have a solution for you? Right. But there's a lot of problems that we have in life where we don't necessarily want to solve them right now. Case in point, I've had a faucet in my master bathroom leaking for 6 years. Yes, it's a problem, but I have bigger problems. Right? Dentists are familiar with this, right? It's like, I got a little bit of a toothache, Tylenol exists. I'm going to power through until my face explodes, right? So it comes down to, if you are selling into surface level pain and someone simply identifying that they have a problem, do the proper discovery and conversation of, great, you've got a problem. Talk to me about your priority in solving that problem and what else is interfering with your ability to do that. And is that something that is mission critical? Is it important and urgent right now? Is it important and not urgent? Is it urgent and not important, right? Like, you can use that matrix as well, but asking those questions. And only when you have a customer or potential customer that acknowledges with you, I have a problem that I need to solve and I intend to right now, you've now earned the right to pitch your product of, great, I understand the problem that you want to solve right now. We could probably help you with that. Do you want to see if you can solve that problem right now with us? But we skip those two middle pieces because we get too excited that someone's like, I have a problem. You have a problem, become a superhero. And it's obnoxious.
I love all that. So then deal velocity, actually, it has 2 words in it, deal and velocity. Before you look at velocity, look if you have a deal or not, right? So
you can have a deal. That's right. Like, window shopping is a thing. It's like a psychological thing where sometimes shopping for something is fun. And you might just be getting an idea of like, ooh, this is a cool new tool. I just want to check it out. And if someone's like, so when can we go ahead and bring in your leadership and get this thing signed? You're like, you're a lunatic, right? So it's like, you got to come down to asking those right questions.
About deal velocity, anybody want to comment on that? Which is, it's a funny thing. I've never worked in an organization where they nailed deal velocity. There's always room for improvement. Like, one of these things is, as I say, like, deal and velocity. Is it actually a deal? Why did we put these things into our pipeline if they weren't a deal? So what are your best practices? What are your ways to have really effective deal velocity tracking?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in here. I think, again, the one size fits all approach, first of all, just doesn't work, right? And Hannah, to Hannah's point around, like, just ask them the question. When I'm window shopping and I walk into a shop and they greet me, can I help you? I'll just say, I'm looking for something. I want your help. I'm just window shopping. And I wouldn't have a problem saying that in a software sale either, or any sort of sale. So I just assume humans who want to get on the phone with me or my reps are going to not have a problem with that either. I'm not solving for maybe the 1% of people who may get weird with that question. Like, that just doesn't make sense to me. And so then deal velocity is really dependent on what kind of conversation. In our pipeline, we do have space for sort of a longer term 6, 9, 12-month education timeline. We're okay with that because the nature of what we're doing. And so I look for a different velocity pattern, a different engagement pattern. I serve up different content, different opportunities for engagement with experts in the field. Nothing really about the product yet. That's just a different velocity versus someone who comes in and exactly says, I have a problem. I'm building an RFP. I've got budget and I need to be compliant with X law by X date. Like, that velocity just looks a lot different. And then again, it's everything we've already talked about. So to me, what folks get wrong is there's like one velocity formula in their pipeline. They try to make every deal look the same. And then you've blended it all together and it's wrong for every deal because you built like an average of things. So to me, that's really the secret sauce. Again, it's not like I've solved every problem, but I don't look at everything the same because not every buyer is the same and not every process is going to look the same. Try to build a couple of patterns, 1, 2, 3. That's where I always start when I join an organization.
All right. We already started talking a lot about like some of the common mistakes, like how to do things, how to improve things. And you mentioned like multi-threading and like sharing the information at the right time, qualifying the pipeline at the right time. So this last section is really about some of the things that are in our control. Like, things that are not in our control, we can't. Yeah, okay, fine. But at the same time, at Flowla, we call this like winnable deals. And the role of a digital sales room we see is helping you to win more winnable deals. What is a winnable deal? There's need, there's urgency, there's all those stars aligned. So let's help you, the rep, to do your job in the best way, so you're not doing missteps and you're closing a winnable deal. And when asked the question, like, what are some of the common missteps you see in your sales process, both from the buyer and the seller side, by the way. There were a lot of people answering about poor discovery, obviously, terrible discovery. Poor discovery leads to no results. Poor onboarding leads to churn. We know that. But what I want to focus on is a lot more about what happens after discovery. Throughout the sales process, what can be improved? And things like no multi-threading, lack of guidance, not proper following up. I mean, things like follow up at the wrong time. You chase the seller to get the information. They're a ghost. And then they will come and, as Hannah was saying, like pick up the phone and ask how your family is doing at the very wrong times, or not sharing enough information. Like those things came up as the biggest answers. So first of all, does that resonate with you guys? And which ones do we want to go with first? Like, should we maybe pick one and talk about some best practices? Like, how can you do multi-threading better? Is there a way to do it? Maybe starting with Hannah.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think people get wrong. So no multi-threading, correct. A lot of people don't do that. But then I think when they do multi-threading, they often do it wrong. So there's this assumption that you need to just get lots of touch points in an account. And I'm like that. But if you think about the actual literal meaning of multi-threading, it's something that comes together. So you can't just be like, I'm going to speak to 10 people. It's like, okay, like it needs to compound. So you have to think about it being like, I'm going to speak to this person who I'm assuming is a user. I'm going to leverage that information and get to the leader and say, I spoke to this person, just confirming this to be true. No expectations from you right now. And then you bounce that up and you speak to the CEO, say, really, at the moment, just doing some research to see if it makes sense for us to connect as a group. Just want to make you aware of this conversation. Has it come to your horizon? Just yes or no, don't need anything for, like, it has to integrate. And I think what we do is it's just like, even people that are doing like exec level outbound, where you kind of use the exec's name and get them to CEOs, it's still like, hey dude, I want to be on the golf course. And it's just like, okay. And then like, how is that tying to the 15 conversations on the ground? And also he doesn't like golf. It's just like, there's all these weird things happening. So I say no multi-threading, yes, but then a lot of companies that are doing it or encouraging it and not doing it in the right way. And it's very disconnected, because what you want is that if you have like a kind of pod system where you've got a junior rep integrating with like a senior rep, and then maybe marketing's, on top of that supporting, then you want it to be like, hey, I know that, I know Mary reached out to you. Like I asked her to, like, it's okay. Like, I don't know why we hide it. Like, oh, let me just pretend that no one reached out. Like, tell them that we are being extremely intentional about engaging with you because of X, Y, and Z. I used to do multi-threading and say, I used to call it a project. I'd find something relevant and I'd say, trying to get to a roundtable together to discuss this thing that I know is relevant, because I've checked all the job descriptions in their live jobs. I've checked what people signed on and what they were trying to do. So I'm like, I get it, it's real. And then I just keep talking to people around it, and you get like 15 conversations going, and it's like, wow, how did I do this? But you just created something, and then they're like, actually, Hannah, it may not be relevant right now, and that's okay.
At the same time, it's really difficult when, there's people, especially with remote work, in their own silos, they speak to somebody. Like, there were quotes in our research saying, like, I was trying to talk to the sales rep, they were ignoring me, and then someone else was coming from somewhere and like asking me the same questions from this organization. Yeah. So I guess looking at a single source of truth, like, let's see the deal in one single place is quite important too. I don't know. How do you overcome those obstacles? Maybe Lisa.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, assuming we're talking about a winnable deal and all the ingredients you just mentioned, I mean, the way I try to pivot the thought process of my reps is to say, our job is to help the customer feel like they finally did it, like they had a goal and they are achieving it with us. And so it's listening, like you're starting the customer service process really early. And to me, if I need everything in one place, I want it to be in a place that's readable, that's exactly what I want. It's curated. It's not the bullshit, case studies that Christina was talking about, the 10% of people still alive, right? And so again, we do use Flowla. We use that as a way to have a conversation. And then if we're doing that, if we've made the direct person we're talking to excited and confident, they'll naturally bring someone into that deal room, especially if it's easy to use. That multi-threading will start to happen organically. And we may never meet that person, but we can see them looking at things. We can see what's important to them. And then we can enable our champion again to have more of that if that's what they need. So yeah, it's centralization, and then it's just like it's a customer service mindset to us. You know, you use the same tool to onboard, right? You can use Flowla to onboard. We just keep it as like one ongoing conversation that starts as soon as that we qualify that customer and say, hey, you want this? Do you want this deal room? Great, and we start to build it. So that's how we think about it. And then the follow-up and guidance all kind of falls into play.
And Christina, before I get your perspective, I've done a terrible job with the time, and we only have 3 minutes, and we have so many questions, of course. That's the usual, but you can address, we'll collect all the questions and answer you. But one of them is really interesting that comes from our LinkedIn Live, and it's about like engagement at the prospect level, like, at the prospect level at an enterprise account, because there's a difference between SMB and enterprise. Or is there really, like, can I ask you, like, can I put you on the spot and ask you, because you have so much experience, like, is there a difference between engaging a prospect at a startup versus an enterprise? And people are asking, like, at an enterprise, what can I do? How can I grab their attention, keep it engaged?
Is that to me? Who is that to?
Yes, it was to you.
Okay.
I put you on the spot
Yes.
there. Yeah.
There is a huge difference in terms of how you outreach and multi-thread when it is a startup versus a mid-market versus an enterprise. And usually it comes down with specialization and focus and prioritization. And then lastly, coming with cost, money, budgeting, and operational excellence. When you are working a much larger true enterprise deal, you are looking at an average of 12 to 18 month sales cycles because of a procurement, security, and legal process. You are looking at 10 plus stakeholders that need to either be involved in the know or
50.
actually
Let's make it 50, Christina.
Like,
I've been
100, right? Like, there are more people, which means it takes longer. And so when we talk about this concept of velocity, everyone thinks when you say, like, talk to me about deal velocity, what they mean is go faster. Pushing for speed isn't necessarily the right thing. When you are working an enterprise deal, you have to get really comfortable slowing down, focusing, getting prescriptive, and following their process. When it's a mid-market deal, what you're going to run into a lot is random people that they didn't realize needed to be involved in this deal to get looped in. So you're asking a mid-market organization, talk to me about your buying process and the people who have to get involved and what does procurement look like? And guess what? They don't know because they're in hyperscale, hyper growth mode and things are changing every single day. So you have to be patient and sometimes guide them a little bit in how they should buy. And when it is a small startup, you're dealing with somebody like me where I'm like squirrel and I'm focusing on 80 different things. And yes, I want the thing that you have, but also I realized that you and I spoke for an hour yesterday and today I don't remember what we talked about. I don't remember what your product does. I don't remember how much it costs. And if I don't have an email from you reminding me, then you have to start cold with me all over again. Oh, and by the way, halfway through our time today, I'm going to get pulled into a fire and I'm going to have to leave. And so the way that you are interacting with people has to edit and has to change. Otherwise, you have no common denominator and then you have no guiding light for how you're selling into these organizations. So differentiating is key.
I think that was an amazing answer to get
started.
And with that, we come to the top of the hour. Anything anybody wants to add? And I'm so sorry for doing such a terrible job with the time. We will get back to the questions. We'll share the recording of this call, but this has been an amazing conversation. So I'm thanking my panelists and I'm getting their final words, if you don't mind. Hannah, do you want to?
Final words. So we've spoken a lot about buyer centricity, as you can imagine, creating more flexibility so that you can meet buyers where they are, that we can also provide them with multiple ways for them to interact based on wherever their head's at, right? And also to Christina's point, just making sure you edit the way in which you're engaging with them based on the different sales cycle or different sales engagement that you're working on. So buyer first always, and you'll probably win more often than not.
Love that. Thank you. Lisa, Christina, any final words?
I would just say in their own ways, Christina and Hannah have both talked about putting yourself in the buyer's shoes, whoever that buyer is. And I just think that's incredibly important. And in every way, how you engage with them, how you communicate with them, how they want to consume information. If you just keep coming back to that constantly, a lot of what we talked about will come naturally.
Absolutely.
I will end it by saying no practice equals no progress. And remember, when you are training your people, most human beings don't do what's taught, they do what's caught. So if you're not leading by example and measuring and inspecting what needs to be done, you can guarantee your people aren't following your process.
Oh my God, preach. Thank you, Christina. This was a fantastic conversation. Thank you for joining me at my very first webinar at Flowla. I hope everybody enjoyed. I'm conscious there has been some technical mishaps as well, where we couldn't, open the studio to everybody, which is why we're going to be sharing the recording right after. So you'll be receiving the email hopefully within the next hour or some time. But otherwise, feel free to reach out. Please follow my panelists. I hope they enjoyed this and they come back, because I love talking to them. And I've been so privileged to be on an all-female panel in my very first webinar. This was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Wonderful. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.